Imagine inviting your ex to your wedding just to humiliate her, only to discover she's now a secret millionaire who owns the very hall you're getting married in. What happens next will leave you shocked. Stay tuned, because this scandalous Ghanaian wedding story is filled with twists you won't see coming. And hey, before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you would do if you were in Rebecca's shoes. The city of Accra pulsed with excitement as wedding preparations filled the air. In East Legon, one of the most enviable neighborhoods, the focus was on the upcoming union between Daniel and Sophia. Daniel, a 32-year-old man with a striking presence and a reputation for his charm, had spent weeks parading his upcoming marriage as though it were the crowning achievement of his life. To him, marrying Sophia was not just about love, but about status. She came from a lineage of wealth and influence, her family known in political and business circles, and Daniel saw their union as a way to elevate himself permanently into elite society. As florists filled the mansion with fresh hibiscus arrangements and decorators draped imported fabrics across marble banisters, Daniel strutted through the house with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His suit fittings, his rehearsed entrances, even the curated guest list, everything was designed to reflect power. But beneath all the glitter of his preparations was a hidden agenda, one more personal and venomous than even his closest friends suspected. Buried in that long guest list was the name of a woman who once held his heart, Rebecca. Years ago, she was the young woman who had given him unconditional love when he had almost nothing. She was soft-spoken, determined, and believed in him when no one else did. Yet he had discarded her without hesitation when he realized she did not fit the image of success he envisioned. To him, she was nothing more than a reminder of struggle, a woman from a cola market with big dreams that he never thought would come true. He laughed at her ambitions, dismissing them as fantasies of someone destined to remain in mediocrity. The decision to invite her was not rooted in nostalgia, but in malice. Daniel's pride fed on the thought of seeing Rebecca walk into the glittering wedding hall, surrounded by dignitaries, celebrities, and wealthy guests, only to face the reality that he had moved on to something far greater. He crafted her invitation with deliberate cruelty, wording it in such a way that it dripped with mockery. In bold letters, he highlighted the opulence of the event, ending with a sharp note that she should come and see what she missed. For Daniel, it was not enough to move forward in life. He needed her to watch him shine while she, in his mind, remained in the shadows of poverty. But unknown to him, the woman he once mocked had been busy rewriting her own story. After their bitter breakup, Rebecca left Accra with nothing but pain and determination. In Kumasi, she started small, selling local produce with fierce discipline. What began as a humble trading business grew steadily, her instincts guiding her to expand into cocoa and shea butter exports. Through sleepless nights, failed shipments, and betrayals from people she trusted, she hardened, learned, and rose. Within a few short years, she built Owusu Exports Limited, a company that now supplied international markets and employed hundreds across Ghana. Rebecca's fortunes transformed dramatically. She purchased estates in Trasacco and cantonments, drove luxury SUVs with diplomatic plates, and traveled in and out of the country with ease. Beyond her wealth, she gained influence. She dined with ministers, sealed deals with foreign investors, and cultivated a reputation for resilience and brilliance. In circles where Daniel struggled to be acknowledged, her name was spoken with respect. Yet for all her success, Rebecca kept her triumphs away from public spectacle. She avoided the constant flaunting that had become Daniel's identity, preferring instead to let her work and her quiet power speak for her. To most people from her past, she still appeared as the simple girl they once knew. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She had learned that power was sweetest when it was revealed at the right moment, to the right audience. So when the invitation from Daniel arrived, laced with ridicule and arrogance, Rebecca did not respond with anger. Instead, she smiled. She recognized immediately what he was trying to do, strip her of her dignity one last time. But what Daniel didn't know was that the tables had already turned. The girl he intended to humiliate was no longer the powerless woman he once discarded. She was a millionaire in her own right, commanding respect and influence that would eclipse everything Daniel thought he had gained. As the wedding day approached, Daniel's arrogance only grew. He rehearsed the moment in his mind, her entrance, her silence, her shame. He imagined her forced smiles as she watched him take vows with Sophia under golden chandeliers, her humiliation complete. He saw himself shaking hands with dignitaries while she stood forgotten at the edge of the crowd. In his fantasy, Rebecca's presence was the final stamp of his victory, the proof that he had risen while she had been left behind. But fate was preparing something entirely different. Rebecca, calm and calculating, was already deciding what to wear, how to arrive, and precisely when to reveal the truth about the life she had built. She would not confront him, not shout, not create a scene. Instead, she would let the truth reveal itself in its own devastating way. The stage was set. Daniel thought he had designed the perfect spectacle to crush an old lover. But in reality, he had invited into his own wedding the very person who would unravel his carefully built illusions. And though he did not yet know it, the humiliation he had prepared for another would soon return to him tenfold. The wedding day finally arrived, and Accra was buzzing with whispers about the grand ceremony. The chosen venue was the luxurious Golden Tulip Grand Ballroom, a place reserved for Ghana's elite. Imported roses lined the walkways, chandeliers glittered above the polished marble floors, and the air carried the scent of expensive perfumes. Guests began streaming in, business moguls, politicians, celebrities, and high-ranking officials. For Daniel, this was more than a marriage, it was his coronation into wealth and influence. Sophia, radiant in her custom-made lace gown stitched with crystals flown in from Paris, walked among the guests with the grace of royalty. Her family, known for their wealth and arrogance, welcomed dignitaries with smiles that carried undertones of superiority. The atmosphere was electric, cameras flashed endlessly, and whispers of admiration filled the hall. Everything about the day screamed power. But amidst all the glitter, Daniel had his eyes on one moment alone, the arrival of Rebecca. He had positioned himself near the grand entrance, rehearsing the smug look he would wear when she finally walked in. In his imagination, she would come in timidly, probably dressed modestly, outshone by the glittering gowns and diamond jewelry of the elite crowd. He pictured her shifting uncomfortably, forcing a smile, embarrassed at her own presence. For Daniel, this was the climax he had been waiting for, the perfect humiliation of the woman he had left behind. Then the moment came. Outside, the sound of engines announced the arrival of another guest. The whispers began before she even entered. A sleek black Range Rover Vogue rolled to a stop, its tinted windows reflecting the blazing Ghanaian sun. The chauffeur stepped out quickly, opening the back door with precision. From the car emerged Rebecca. The room fell into an uneasy silence as heads turned toward the entrance. Rebecca walked gracefully, her cocoa-brown skin glowing under the golden lights. She wore a rich Kent gown woven with gold threads, the fabric hugging her figure elegantly, her presence commanding respect. Around her wrist sparkled a diamond bracelet that caught the light with every step. She was no longer the girl people remembered from Makola Market, her aura spoke of power, success, and quiet authority. But what shocked the crowd even more was her companion. Walking beside her was Richard Wellington, a billionaire in his 50s whose influence stretched from Ghana to London. Known for his investments in energy, shipping, and real estate, Richard was one of the most respected businessmen in the country. His presence alone was enough to shift the energy in the room. Guests leaned closer, whispering furiously, trying to figure out Rebecca's connection to him. Daniel, standing near the altar, forced a smile, convinced that this was nothing but theatrics. In his mind, Rebecca had surely begged her way into the company of a wealthy man, using his presence to elevate herself. He smirked, already planning to use the moment to mock her later. But beneath his forced arrogance was a flicker of unease. She was not the broken woman he expected. She carried herself with confidence, moving through the room as though she belonged there more than anyone else. The whispers grew louder. Women admired her elegance, men studied her with intrigue, and even Sophia's family shifted uncomfortably. Something about Rebecca's arrival disturbed the balance of the room. The carefully curated event, meant to showcase Daniel and Sophia as the ultimate couple, suddenly felt overshadowed by the quiet power of the woman he had once dismissed. Rebecca's calm smile only deepened the tension. She moved with unhurried grace, acknowledging a few familiar faces but never flaunting her presence. She seemed to glide across the ballroom floor, her gown shimmering under the chandelier lights, her every step deliberate. She carried no shame, no discomfort, only composure. Daniel, however, saw her confidence as defiance. To him, it was proof she was pretending, faking wealth and elegance in a desperate attempt to prove a point. He believed she was still the same girl he once left behind, only dressed differently. That belief fed his arrogance, blinding him to the storm that was quietly brewing. As the ceremony began, the master of ceremony made light-hearted jokes, musicians filled the hall with soulful highlife tunes, and guests raised glasses of champagne. Yet, beneath the surface, the atmosphere had changed. Everyone was now curious about Rebecca, who she was, why she had come, and most importantly, how she had arrived with Richard Wellington. Daniel thought he was in control of the show, that Rebecca's mere presence would serve as the humiliation he intended. But in truth, the balance of power had shifted the moment she stepped into the hall. What Daniel didn't realize was that Rebecca was not here as a victim. She had come as a storm, calm on the surface, but carrying revelations that would shake his world to its very core. The stage was no longer his. Without saying a word, Rebecca had already become the center of attention. And soon, the humiliation Daniel had planned for her would unravel into his own public downfall. The ceremony moved along with the pomp and grandeur expected of a society wedding in Ghana. Soft highlife melodies played in the background as waiters in white gloves moved swiftly between tables, topping up champagne glasses and arranging trays of exotic canapés. Cameras flashed endlessly, capturing Sophia's radiant gown and Daniel's carefully rehearsed smile. For him, this was supposed to be the ultimate victory, the day his new life eclipsed every reminder of his past. Rebecca sat calmly at a prime table near the front, her golden-threaded Kent shimmering under the chandelier lights. She had not spoken a word, yet her presence unsettled many in the room. Some guests could not stop sneaking glances at her, whispering behind fans and champagne glasses. Her confidence, her composure, her aura, it all carried a weight Daniel hadn't anticipated. But he reassured himself with one thought: before the night ended, she would be embarrassed, and he would stand above her. As the vows concluded and applause filled the hall, the master of ceremony, an energetic man dressed in a tailored agbada, took the microphone. He announced that it was time to honor the couple with gifts and pledges from family, friends, and corporate sponsors. The air grew thick with anticipation. Guests leaned forward, curious about the names and contributions that would be read aloud. One by one, wealthy guests pledged extravagant gifts, holiday trips to Dubai, plots of land in East Legon, and luxury cars. Sophia's family, never shy about flaunting their wealth, presented the couple with a check worth thousands of cedis. Applause filled the room with each announcement, but Daniel's attention remained fixed on one thought: the moment Rebecca's name would be called. He had imagined her contribution would be something small, something to highlight her supposed mediocrity compared to the grandeur around her. The thought alone made him smirk in anticipation. Then the MC paused, holding up a card with a wide smile. His voice boomed across the hall as he announced a surprise. A major donor, he said, had made an extraordinary pledge to support the couple's honeymoon foundation, an amount so large it left even him astonished. The guests murmured, curious, eyes scanning the room. And then the name was read aloud. From Madam Rebecca Owens, CEO of Owens Exports Limited. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Phones were pulled out instantly, fingers flying across screens as guests searched her name. Gasps and murmurs followed almost immediately. Search results revealed Forbes Africa features, glowing business articles, and pictures of Rebecca standing alongside international investors and dignitaries. She wasn't just successful, she was a millionaire, one of the most powerful women in Ghana's export industry. Daniel's forced smile froze, his jaw tightening as the realization hit him. This was not the struggling girl he remembered. This was a woman who had built an empire. The humiliation he had prepared was slipping away, replaced by a cold wave of dread. His eyes darted towards Sophia, who was suddenly restless, her grip on her bouquet tightening as whispers filled the air around them. Rebecca remained calm, her face unreadable. She lifted her glass slightly, acknowledging the MC's announcement with the same grace she had carried all evening. To her, it was nothing unusual, just another business gesture. But to the room, it was a revelation. Suddenly, conversations shifted. The spotlight that had once been on Daniel and Sophia was now firmly fixed on Rebecca. Daniel's mother, who had once mocked Rebecca for being unfit for her son, sat frozen in disbelief. Sophia's relatives exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the woman they had been prepared to laugh at now commanded more wealth and influence than many of them combined. The laughter and whispers Daniel had envisioned for Rebecca had turned into admiration and envy from the very crowd he wanted to impress. The MC, sensing the excitement, added fuel to the fire. He spoke about Rebecca's contributions to Ghana's export market, her international recognition, and her philanthropy. With each word, Daniel's humiliation deepened. He could feel the eyes of his guests burning into him, silently questioning how he had ever let such a woman go. The grand wedding, designed to showcase his triumph, was slipping out of his control. Rebecca had not uttered a single word, yet she had stolen the show entirely. And though Daniel struggled to compose himself, inside, his pride was crumbling. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Rebecca's silent storm had just begun, and before the night was over, his carefully constructed world would collapse completely. The grand ballroom that had once been buzzing with music and laughter was now filled with whispers and uneasy stares. Daniel shifted uncomfortably at the altar, his pride stinging with every glance thrown in Rebecca's direction. The woman he had invited to be a spectacle of humiliation was suddenly the centerpiece of admiration and respect. Sophia, his new bride, forced a smile for the cameras, but her fingers clenched tightly around her bouquet. She felt the shift in the room more sharply than anyone else. The wedding that was supposed to crown her as the queen of high society had turned into a stage for Rebecca's quiet dominance. And then, the moment that would shatter the last fragments of Daniel's illusion arrived. As the master of ceremony prepared to move on, Richard Wellington rose from his seat. His tall frame and commanding presence silenced the crowd. Known as one of Ghana's most powerful billionaires, his words carried weight everywhere he went. All eyes followed him as he took the microphone. With calm authority, Richard addressed the guests. He introduced himself not as Rebecca's lover, as many had assumed, but as her business partner and investor. His announcement struck the hall like a thunderbolt. The murmurs swelled into a storm of gossip. It became clear that Rebecca had not only built her wealth but had attracted the trust and investment of one of the most influential men in the country. But Richard was not done. With deliberate precision, he revealed another truth that sent the hall into chaos: the very luxury hotel where the wedding was taking place, the Golden Tulip Grand Ballroom, belonged to Rebecca. She had quietly purchased it 2 years earlier through one of her companies. The chandeliers glittering above them, the polished floors beneath their feet, the very walls surrounding them were hers. The announcement broke the room into gasps. Guests turned sharply to stare at Daniel, whose face drained of color. The humiliation was unbearable. He had invited Rebecca here to be humbled in front of society, yet it was he who now stood exposed in her empire, celebrating his marriage inside a building she owned. His carefully crafted image of dominance had crumbled entirely. But the storm had only begun. Rebecca, who had sat silently the entire evening, gave a subtle nod to an assistant standing near the projector screen. Moments later, the lights dimmed, and images flickered onto the giant screen at the front of the ballroom. The crowd leaned forward, squinting at what appeared to be receipts, bank transfers, and photos. Within seconds, gasps filled the hall as the images became clear. They revealed Sophia, Daniel's bride, on lavish trips to Dubai and London, in the company of another man. Pictures of private dinners, hotel check-ins, and expensive gifts flashed across the screen. Alongside the images were receipts of luxury items and money transfers, proof of her secret affair. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests shouted in disbelief, women covered their mouths, and men shook their heads. Phones lit up as people snapped photos of the screen, already preparing to leak the scandal to social media. Sophia's family was thrown into panic, their perfect image collapsing in front of the nation's elite. Sophia's face crumbled as the whispers turned into accusations. The once radiant bride became a symbol of betrayal, her reputation destroyed in minutes. Daniel, standing beside her, was frozen in shock. The woman he had chosen over Rebecca, the woman he had believed was his ticket to a higher social class, had been exposed in the most humiliating way possible. The whispers grew into roars. Some guests stood to leave, others stayed to revel in the scandal, their faces lit with gossip. The grand wedding had turned into a circus of disgrace, and Daniel was at the center of it all. Rebecca never raised her voice, never gloated, never even looked directly at Daniel. She sat calmly, sipping her champagne, her composure sharper than any insult she could have hurled. Every revelation, every scandal, unfolded around her, yet she remained untouchable, her silence more powerful than 1,000 words. By the time the lights returned, the wedding was in ruins. Sophia's veil had slipped, her tears smearing her makeup, while Daniel stood broken, unable to face the crowd. Their fairy tale union had turned into a public nightmare. And still, Rebecca remained poised, the storm around her serving as silent proof that power, when wielded with patience, could destroy far more than anger ever could. The once glittering ballroom was now a storm of whispers, gasps, and scandal. The golden decorations and polished chandeliers no longer symbolized luxury, they had become the backdrop for humiliation. Guests who had arrived to celebrate Daniel and Sophia's union now lingered only to witness their downfall. Sophia stood trembling, her bouquet abandoned on the floor, her veil clinging limply to her shoulders. The makeup that had once made her glow now streaked down her cheeks in black rivers of mascara. Her once proud family huddled in the corner, their heads bowed in shame. Their perfect daughter had been exposed in front of society's most influential eyes, and there was no hiding from the evidence plastered on the projector screen. Daniel stood motionless beside her, his carefully rehearsed smile long gone. The man who had strutted through the morning with pride and arrogance was now a shell of himself. His hands shook, sweat glistened on his forehead, and his suit, tailored for triumph, clung to him like a costume of mockery. Every whisper in the hall felt like a dagger slicing through his pride. Every phone held up to record his humiliation reminded him that this scandal would not end tonight. By morning, the entire country would know. Rebecca remained seated at her table, sipping her champagne with the poise of a queen. She hadn't uttered a word the entire evening, yet the entire night belonged to her. She had been mocked, discarded, and underestimated, but now she sat as the silent victor. Her calm demeanor was more devastating to Daniel than anger ever could be. Slowly, she rose to her feet. Her gown shimmered under the light as she walked with graceful steps toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on her. The music stopped, the whispers faded, and for a moment, even the air seemed to pause. Daniel, seeing her approach, dropped to his knees before her. Pride shattered, he reached out as though touching her would somehow redeem him. His voice cracked with desperation, his face twisted with regret. All his arrogance was gone. The man who once mocked her for being a girl from Makola Market now begged at her feet. Rebecca looked down at him, her eyes cold but calm. Her silence lingered, piercing the air thicker than any insult could. When she finally spoke, her words were low, deliberate, and merciless. She reminded him that he had invited her here to strip her of dignity, to make her the spectacle of his rise. But instead, the tables had turned. Life had shamed him, not her. She reminded him that she built her success brick by brick, while he had tried to build his on the borrowed wealth of others. And now, in front of the very audience he wanted to impress, his mask had been ripped away. Her words echoed in the hall, every sentence cutting deeper into Daniel's pride. She did not shout. She did not gloat. She spoke with the authority of someone who no longer needed revenge, because her success was revenge enough. When she turned to leave, Richard Wellington stood and followed her, his presence reinforcing her power. The cameras flashed wildly as she walked out, her gown trailing behind her like the robe of a queen leaving her throne. The doors closed softly behind her, and with her exit, the atmosphere in the ballroom collapsed completely. Guests began to stand, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smirking at the scandal they would retell for months to come. Phones buzzed endlessly as videos of Sophia's affair and Daniel's humiliation spread like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, hashtags about the wedding began trending, mocking Daniel mercilessly. Sophia fled the hall in tears, followed by her disgraced family. Daniel remained on his knees, his eyes hollow, staring at the empty doorway where Rebecca had disappeared. The man who thought he was untouchable had been broken in a single evening. His dream of rising into high society had been destroyed, not by enemies, but by the very woman he had once underestimated. By dawn, the story dominated Ghanaian headlines. Social media was flooded with memes, videos, and commentary. Daniel's name was ridiculed, Sophia was shamed, and Rebecca was celebrated as a symbol of strength, resilience, and poetic justice. She became the face of triumph, the woman who had been mocked but who rose to a throne higher than any of her enemies could reach. And Daniel? He was left with nothing but his humiliation, a ruined reputation, and the haunting truth that the woman he once thought beneath him had become the one person he could never rise above. Daniel invited Rebecca to be humiliated, but instead, he destroyed himself. What a scandal! Daniel thought he was going to shame Rebecca, but life flipped the script and destroyed him instead. Now I want to hear from you, was Rebecca right to stay silent and let success speak, or should she have destroyed him even more? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next juicy story right here on this channel.